Cleopatra's Sunken Palace, a serene underwater reconstruction of ancient halls resting in peaceful silt. It is a curious thing to begin a story underwater, as if one were opening a vellum page with wet fingers. And so we begin here in a gentle way, leaning into a hush that prefers suggestion to spectacle. Breathe with the light as it comes down, and let the ribs answer the tide. We will walk slowly and keep our hands to ourselves. The shallow harbor folds like a cooled garment. Pale turquoise thins into deeper indigo as shafts of light make soft ribbons through drifting silt, and the whole scene reads like a faint, patient plan rather than a broadcasted ruin. Particles fall like very small punctuation, each mode a calm comma in a sentence that refuses to hurry. Around us, the ruined plan of Antirodos arranges itself in low relief. A red granite column leans as if making a modest bow. A sphinx, half sunk, keeps an expression more of company than of grandeur, and somewhere beneath a threshold a small polished ring rests like a private punctuation. These are not theatrical props, but the patient grammar of place. Breathe with the current. Inhale as the light threads a plinth. Exhale as the water smooths an edge. Sound is muffled and musical. The soft rasp of silt sliding, the faint sigh as a column settles a millimeter, the distant vowel of a gull stretched into a long, courteous note. The palace remembers feet as a pattern of worn stone and thumb polish. It remembers the measured cadence of sandals rather than the shout of triumph. One might suppose palaces demand heroics, and yet this one keeps a domestic hush. Spilled oil remembered as a scent smudge in a corner, a bowl's small click preserved like a counted beat of a day. Place a hand lightly upon your sternum and another at the soft of the belly. Feel the slow give as breath becomes a tide. With each inhale, imagine the pale ribbon of light drawing closer to a plinth. With each exhale, imagine the water smoothing edges like a careful palm. Breathe with the tide as you steady us both. Slow in, slow out, until the body learns the palace's tempo. Let the shoulders soften, let the jaw unclench. The marble here is patient, rose-veined, cooler grays, pigments worn to whispers and hairline cracks. Capitals wear algae like embroidery, and the fluting of columns reads as gentle furrows under a palm. We imagine a portico facing the harbor, its plinth softened, a shallow basin holding a film of silt that makes a pale horizontal glow. On that basin's lip, a tiny polished ring nestles, its glint modest as a private punctuation, asking only to be noticed and not exposed. Breathe with that small attention, and let the attention be kind. Modern ears arrived later, sonar that sketches geometry, cores that unroll time in thin pages, a camera that translates dim tones into stillness. But for now, we will prefer textures over diagrams. The scholar in us murmurs parentheses. It is a curious fact, one might suppose, and those murmurs will stay gentle, provisional, deferential to the place's own patience. The reader will perhaps imagine plotted grids. We imagine slow hands and small domestic economies. From the west, a gulf thread brings reed scent and an old salt. From the east, a faint current brings rice slim sediments and a hush of reed sounds. In the courtyard fragments, the imagined domestic noises gather. The scrape of a crate, a child's pebble counting, the soft fold of cloth. These daily noises are the palace's archivists. Ordinary repetition is what has most likely earned things this long sleep. Breathe with that domestic archive and let your breathing lengthen to its cadence. We promise a calm reconstruction, portico by portico, chamber by chamber, an ordered walk that privileges tenderness over revelation. We will carry motifs, a column's red flank, a sphinx's companionable face, the ring's small glint, repeating them as if they were lit candles marking rooms rather than clues to a mystery. The aim is not to prove, but to accompany. We will listen for the ways ordinary life arranges itself into architecture. There is a consolation in thinking the sea as curator rather than conqueror. Salt and silt have kept what fire and plunder might have otherwise erased. In quiet moments, one may imagine the palace's painted patterns sleeping under a soft mantle of particles, pigments pressed into grain, as if the earth itself took pity and tucked them in. The mind that prefers tidy endings will press for a single cause, but the more generous mind will notice how preservation sometimes looks like mercy. We will not hurry toward explanation. We will allow the place to be itself for a while, offering only the promise of a slow companioning walk. Match your breathing once more. Inhale with the drawn ribbon of light. Exhale with the smoothing water, and allow the palace's hush to settle around the ribs. Let us move on, gently. Scholarly framing and gentle context, we place ourselves now at the edge of a long story and adopt the posture of careful readers, not loud with certainty, but modest with curiosity. Breathe with this modesty. Inhale as we name a coastline. Exhale as we let conjecture settle. The palace sits in a particular geography, Antirodos, the royal quarter of Alexandria, where stone met sea and scholarship rubbed shoulders with salt. One might suppose that such a place requires imperial pronouncements to be interesting. Yet the gentlest histories are those that prefer texture to trumpet. Imagine the harbor at dawn in our slow reconstruction. Small craft of a measured draft draw close to quays. Ropes rasp in the same low voice as a man testing an amphora's balance. Gulls offer a long vowel that hangs like a punctuation over the water. The quay is not clamorous. It is a choreography of hands and weights and repeated knots. And it is this repeated choreography that makes a place legible to those who listen for habit. Pause and feel the chest widen with the harbor's steady cadence. A scholar's breath learned from ropes and amphory. Turn from the quay into an oak avenue that once led from the shore to shaded porticoes. Trunks stand in even spacing as if scaffolding a measured walk. Their bark carries lichen like embroidered maps. Children learn the avenue's rhythm by stepping from trunk to trunk. Did they race? Or did they trace patterns with small feet? Both are plausible, and both are tender. The oak teaches a bodily grammar. Place the foot. Pause, count, continue. Breathe on that taut gait, and let the legs relax into the lesson. Within a courtyard, a hearth keeps domestic time. A low ring of stones, softened by soot and by later silt, marks where bread was flattened and where stories were murmured at low volume. The hearth's sound, an ember's small huff, the soft clack of a pot against stone, translates underwater into gentle counters. Imagine a woman smoothing cloth near the fire, her movements precise, and feel the shoulders lose a fraction of their tension as we mimic the smoothing motion in our own limbs. The scholar in us notes that peat and anaerobic conditions preserve traces of smoke and food residues. The listener in us simply breathes with the warmth. Beyond the courtyard, the tidal plain writes records in its own slow script. The deeper oval of an ox's hoof, the lighter crescent of a child's print, the shallow channel where a cart once turned. These impressions are a communal ledger, seasonal not sudden, where tides reveal and conceal with a rhythm that resembles breathing. We press an imagined fingertip into such a hollow and feel the cool give of mud, a body return cue that brings attention to texture and to patience. Let the fingertip dwell and then lift. Trade and exchange embroidered the town with foreign shapes. Amphories speak of Crete. Spindle whirls whisper of cloth-making habits moved by waves. A bit of Nile silt lodged in a tile tells of inland contact. These are small testimonies rather than headline events. Goods arrive, are inspected, integrated, repeated, and then stored. One might ask, how does a port remain gentle when exchange is its vocation? The answer is repetition. Routine makes commerce into a lullaby rather than a trumpet. Breathe in with the counting of a crate, out with the settling thud as it finds its place. Archaeological methods are modestly described here because method itself can be a kind of mercy. Sonar renders undersea silhouette like a delicate drawing. Photogrammetry stitches hundreds of small images into a patient composite. Cores appear as vertical diaries in which pollen, ash, and sand become entries. The scientists' instruments are listening devices. They do not pronounce, but translate. It is a curious fact that different instruments speak different dialects. Sonar suggests shape, cores narrate time, and a conservator's brush reveals touch. We will favor their conversations over proclamation. A sustained wonder attends the thought that everyday things, loom weights, cooking pots, the angle of a threshold, survive as social grammar. How small economies and household practices accumulate into civic rhythm is a marvel rather than a puzzle. Can an apron string or a thumb polish be as telling as a royal decree? The scholar will quietly answer yes, and the reader will perhaps imagine households taught by repetition how to maintain themselves through seasons of abundance and seasons of lean. Let us place one more breath cue here. Inhale with the soft imagining of reed smoke on an evening breeze. Exhale with the thought of a hand smoothing a lintel. These minor gestures are the scaffolding of belonging. We will carry their traces forward as motifs: harbor rasp, oak cadence, hearth's soft clock, tidal ledger, returning to them like footfalls on a familiar path. Primary mystery unfolding. The palace's soft question, we pause at the palace's hush and find that the most precise thing we can do is to listen. There is a question here that is soft and civic rather than sensational. How does a place of measured ceremony and ordinary labor become a mapped quiet beneath silt? Breathe with that small question. Let the belly rise and settle as we keep company with curiosity. Under the water, the architecture reads like a faded grammar. A column drum makes a faint punctuation. A stair preserves the imprint of repeated slippers, and a shallow basin keeps a film of sediment that makes a pale, horizontal glow. We feel the cool clay beneath our toes and notice how the imagined grit offers slight resistance under a fingertip. Our breathing slows when we attend to texture. These traces narrate lives through ordinary marks. The thumb smear on a lintel, a worn groove where a rope was habitually looped, rather than through proclamation. We will offer three explanatory voices, tender in their tones, each a plausible part of the palace's story. The first is the slow, patient return. In this telling, the sea does not rush in. It is invited by millimeters. Saline influence creeps into wells. Reed species edge inland. And over generations, thresholds are raised, hearths relocated, and floor levels incrementally altered. The acoustic image is a long, low hum, elongated, forgiving, and the human response is incremental adaptation rather than flight. It is an image of endurance. The second is the episodic breach. Picture a season in which earth and water conspire. A tremor loosens a shoreline. A storm pushes with a new geometry, and water writes a fresh line through streets. In the soil record, this gesture appears as a sharp sand lens, artifacts scattered with abrupt orientation. The material voice here is percussion, an audible, angular deposit amid quieter strata. We do not dramatize disaster. We note its possibility. A single night may alter habit for a generation, and that possibility deserves a quiet mention. Third is the human accumulation, the slow undoing performed by many sensible choices: peat cut for fuel, marsh clearance for grazing, horde activities that erode buffer zones. Individually, these are modest acts, spade against earth, boards laid for shelter, but together they recompose drainage and sediment flows. The soundscape of this account is domestic: the scrape of spade, the cart's low turn, the conversation at the threshold about where to fetch fuel. Ethically, This scenario diffuses agency and asks for shared responsibility rather than blame. It is a curious fact that the evidence rarely insists upon a single cause. Cores may show alternating bands. Peat, then sand, then pollen shifts, while sonar draws an architectural line that is interrupted in places by coarse deposits. How then should we compose our narrative? Perhaps by allowing multiplicity. Let several truths coexist, not as rivals, but as harmonics that together describe a complex transition. This kind of interpretive modesty is not a failure, but a form of generosity toward the past. Between these theoretical frames, we must not forget the intimate particulars. An archaeologist's hand in the silt may uncover a toy half-wrapped in later sediment, a small wooden peg preserving the thumb polish of many fingers, a bead threaded on a snapped cord. Such finds are not grand evidence, but human-scale testimonies. They convert abstract sequences into personal stories of habit, worry, and care. When we meet a single ring in a lowered chamber, the big debates recede and compassion approaches. We turn now, carefully, to just such an inner chamber, our sunken ziggurat motif folded into domestic scale. We stoop under a modest lintel because the room was always small. The water hushes itself into a private foam. There, half buried beneath a skin of silt, a narrow shelf holds a single object, a signet-like ring, its metal softened, its engraving worn to a whisper. The diver's gloved finger parts the silt with a muffled rasp. A conservator inhales through a radio. For a small moment, scientific language gives way to tenderness. One thinks inwardly, not as ownership, but as careful custody. We also notice what is not there. Organic fabrics, fine wooden chests, and some delicate metals may have vanished or been eaten by salt without peat's protection. Absence, too, speaks. Missing hinges, the silence where a lullaby might have been. Sometimes absence grants a different sort of intimacy. It leaves space for patient imagination rather than insisting upon completeness. We pose gentle questions as invitations rather than demands. Did the town adjust slowly and then forget to move entirely? Did a storm one season right itself in sand, while people carried on with prudent resilience? Did many small human choices, made by hands we cannot name, reorient the margins until the sea simply took on new language? Which is more consoling, to know the mechanism or to acknowledge that people lived and adapted until a new condition arrived? The answer, perhaps, is both. Before we leave this section, let us place a small bodily cue. Press a palm over the sternum, feel the slow lift, and let that deliberate contact steady the curiosity. We will carry the motifs. The ring remembers, the stair remembers feet, the lintel's thumb polish, forward as companion prompts, not as verdicts. Breathe with that companioning. Inhale, patient. Exhale, kindly. And take the palace's soft question with you like a warm pebble in the hand. Grand halls and porticoes. Walking the royal plan, we move now with slow, companionable steps beneath a shallow wash of light and visit the palace's halls as if entering rooms in an intimate house rather than touring a museum of triumphs. Breathe with the corridor. Inhale as a portico opens, exhale as a column's shadow settles. The plan is generous but gentle. Reception halls that once received voices in low register, banquet rooms that favored conversation over clatter, sheltered colonnades that looked seaward and let salt wind outline the day. Imagine a peristyle so arranged that walking it itself became a social grammar. One might suppose that the architecture taught bodies how to greet, how to pause, how to offer hands. The marble underfoot would have been cool before the sea learned to sing upon it. Now its coolness is a remembered comfort. We noticed the thumb polish on a lower step where many hands steadied themselves. The polish reads as belonging, an index of return and of measured repetition. Breathe with the threshold. Inhale as we reach, exhale as we let weight rest. Porticos frame sight lines to the harbor. A colonnade becomes a set of windows to maritime arrivals, and each column's flute is a slow pitch in a civic lullaby. Light falls in soft bars across flagstones, and in those bars we see traces of benches, of small altars near doorways, of a shallow basin set to catch early morning water. The domestic and the ceremonial live next to each other here, not opposed but interlaced like threads in a quiet weave. Pause and let this weave settle at the base of the skull. Walk with us into a reception hall where the floor plan suggests a slow choreography, a central space for speaking, side recesses for quieter exchange, and an approach that makes one small gesture dignified. How did people move in such spaces? Did they lower their eyes, or did they lift them and let the marble gaze return a soft courtesy? The scholar in us wants to map the movement. The companion in us simply notes the embodied etiquette and breathes with its rhythm. Feel the shoulders unhook slightly as we step and listen. We come upon painted traces, lines and paler washes that the sea has softened into a whisper of hue. The pigments are not bold. They are like marginal notes on a manuscript, decorative but modest, suggesting that beauty here was a companion to use rather than a claim to spectacle. One might suppose that a palace should dazzle, and yet these tiles tell a quieter story. A woman drawing water, a child stepping through a doorway, a man testing the balance of trade with a small, approving nod. Breathe with the tiles' gentle telling and let your chest loosen. Between rooms, the thresholds bear small functional marks. A shallow scrape where a cart once turned, a darker crescent where oil habitually spilled, a faint ring carved by rope where mooring lines were once coiled. Such marks are documentary in their own right. They record habit as faithfully as any ledger, and they read like the handwriting of everyday life. We might be tempted to annotate and catalog, but tonight we prefer to let these marks speak for themselves. Let your fingertips imagine the cool and notice the soft ease in the jaw. The palace's orientation encourages pauses, places to stand and to listen. In a small antechamber, we find a narrow bench, its edge worn smooth. A child might have used it to sit while a parent tended a lamp. We stoop in imagination because the room was intimate by design, not to bow, but to align ourselves with the human scale the builders intended. Here the ring's motif returns, reflected in a carved groove like a tiny echo. We do not touch. Our notice is enough. Imagine a platter of figs and an amphora decanted with measured care. A cup passes with a tiny, approving clink that allows speech to follow. In that small choreography, there is civility. Inhale as one holds a cup, exhale as one releases it. A faint halo of lotus and oil drifts in the imagination. In a narrow room, a lamp pulled low suggests quiet study. A rolled papyrus, the softened gleam of a reed pen, the hush of thought made visible. The palace contained learning as well as leisure. Scholarship was threaded through domestic pattern. Breathe with that seam and let the ribs ease. At a low window, a little court frames a slow view of boats drawing near. Inhale as a craft approaches, exhale as it settles. The palace teaches attention by allowing the eye to rest. The architecture organizes civility and teaches bodies to belong by small practices, and in that teaching we find a quiet pedagogy that survives under silt. We will not rush this itinerary. Each room offers a small lesson in continuity, threshold care, gentle acoustics, the economy of gesture. These are the parts of palace life that persist in sediment and in habit. Before we leave this walk, place a hand lightly at the throat and then at the belly. Feel the swallow of breath move through both, steadying the cadence we have adopted. Breathe with the plan. Inhale in the portico, exhale in the hall, and carry this measured gait as we move on to quieter rooms. Cleopatra's sunken palace, royal quarters, and private rooms. Intimacy beneath marble, we enter the palace's private rooms with the hush of guests who have been asked simply to listen, and the world immediately narrows into the scale of bodies and beds rather than proclamations. Breathe with that narrowing. Inhale as a doorway opens. Exhale as your shoulders let go of a little of their armor. The rooms are deliberate and domestic. Low benches, folded textiles stacked with care, small cupboards whose doors close with a practiced hand. Luxury here is not ostentation, but attentive provision, a choreography of comfort practiced day by day. Imagine a bedchamber opening onto a sheltered portico where the air once carried a faint perfume of rose oil and herb. Even beneath water, this scent hangs as a memory caught in pores of stone. A lacquered chest rests against a wall, its metalwork softened by time, and on a folded cloth a small token lies. A child's carved animal worn smooth by fingers, or a signet ring whose engraving has been rubbed thin by habit. These objects are modest in scale, yet insist on being remembered. They are confidences, not announcements, and they teach us how household life enacts tenderness. Private baths are arranged for unhurried routine. Shallow basins edged with tidy tiles, a low bench to rest upon after immersion, a place where ointments are applied and hair is braided. The sound here is minimal, a soft language of water sliding, a cup's delicate note, the whisper of cloth being patted dry. Imagine a hand pausing over a cup. Notice how your own breath lengthens with that suspended, ordinary act. Habit repeated makes those tiny gestures archaeological. It is in repetition that the private becomes preservable. Service nooks and narrow passages stage the ethics of care. A servant's folded list fits a palm. A lamp is tended to keep its wick low. A plate is passed with an economy of motion. One might suppose that grand architecture separates rulers from servants. And yet these private rooms show how attention knits social life together. The household is not a series of isolated rooms, but a network of small attentions that maintain continuity. The artifacts here speak in small measures. A broken perfume phial whose neck holds a residue like dried honey. A bronze pin slightly bent from repeated fastening. A wooden figure smoothed to an oval by a child's pressing fingers. Treat these images gently in the imagination. Their modesty does not diminish their importance. A toy, after all, can anchor memory in ways gilded monuments cannot. When a conservator later lifts such an object on gloved hands, the language is not of treasure but of continuance. In an inward whisper, one might say, not as possession but as custodian attention. There is an economy of scent and cloth that organizes private life. Oil warm on a lamp, the herb sigh of folded linen, the resinous trace of sealing wax. Even in feeble imagination, these scents add texture, brief inhalations that settle beneath the sternum. Let the nose of the mind gather one small scent and then release it. The body learns from such brief rituals how to come to rest. Private devotional acts are frequent and modest. A small bowl left on an altar, a string of beads tucked into a niche, a figurine placed with the steadiness of a practiced hand. These rites are not public spectacle. They are repeated motions that stitch time into a household's fabric. Habit renders them architecture of the heart, humble, steady, and almost invisible to those who do not look. Inscription persists in scratches and maker's marks, perhaps a faint initial on a lintel, perhaps a potter's tally hidden behind stacked jars. These marks read like handwriting on stone and invite friendly interpretation, a known hand, a practiced trade, a maker answering to their own modest pride. Press an imaginary fingertip to your sternum now and feel that small rush of recognition. Let that physical cue steady compassion. Even domestic strain leaves traces. A cushion trampled in haste, a cup set down with a harder clack than usual, a handle mended with patient diligence. Repair is an ethic here. Mending is not shame, but insistence on continuity. The tools of repair, the awl, the needle, the small hammer, leave subtle traces in deposits that later tell a patient archaeologist about refusal to throw away rather than appetite for novelty. We linger in a brief vignette. A scholar unrolls a papyrus beside a low lamp. A footman waits with a cup. A signet is set aside while thought unfolds. The ring motif returns in the margin of such rooms, a small circle of metal kept near study and prayer alike. A child returns the ring when study ends. An elder smooths a corner of cloth into place. Each repetition becomes, almost imperceptibly, a compact of belonging. Let breath lengthen now. Inhale as if lifting the cup. Exhale as if setting it down. And let the rhythm of these small acts translate into bodily ease. These private chambers teach a lasting lesson. Intimacy, practiced again and again, is a form of architecture that endures beneath silt as surely as any column. Carry this modest warmth like a smooth pebble in the palm. When you are ready, we will move further into the palace's quieter margins. A serene underwater reconstruction of ancient halls resting in peaceful silt. It is often at the harbor's edge, where rooms loosen into air and traffic, that a civilization leaves its most patient witnesses. We find them here, waiting without urgency, statues and sphinxes, obelisks and gate forms, their scale gentled by water until it becomes relational rather than imposing. Stone faces half-turned, do not stare so much as listen. Paws of sphinxes, softened by silt, seem to have settled into a posture of rest, and the long shafts of granite hum a low tonal memory, a vibration felt more in the chest than in the ear. Let us breathe with them for a moment. Inhale with the slow curve of a carved shoulder. Exhale with the wide base of a plinth, and feel how the water holds both us and the stone in the same unhurried way. Breathe with the tide. Allow the shoulders to drop. Let the jaw ease as if a long-held sentence has finally found its end. These monuments once stood where the city met the world. The harbor edge was a place of greetings and departures, of shouted names and lifted sails, of goods counted and hands clasped. Now those sounds have been translated into a quieter register. Nets brush stone with a soft, fibrous sigh. Bubbles lift like parentheses. Light slides across basalt and granite as a slow shimmer, pausing in grooves and inscriptions. One might suppose that scale itself has been revised here, that the sea has edited the margins until monument and passerby meet on equal terms. Consider a sphinx at rest, its paws planted in sediment that has learned its shape. The stone remembers the pressure of feet nearby, fishermen, children, officials, and though the faces are worn, the gaze remains a companionable one. It does not command, it accompanies. From the west, a faint current carries the smell memory of rope and pitch. From the east, the harbor opens into a blue that feels like a held breath. We stand between, and the monument stands with us. There is a red granite surface that catches the light just so, the grain brightening as if warmed from within. If we place our imagined palm upon it, we feel not chill but steadiness, the kind that steadies our own breathing in return. Breathe again, slowly. Match the stone's long patience. Feel how the rhythm of inhale and exhale finds a place to rest against the base of the statue. It is a curious fact that erosion teaches intimacy. What was once crisp becomes legible to touch. What was once towering becomes conversational. Like and softened surfaces invite the tracing of fingers. Algae lays a fine calligraphy across cheeks and crowns. These figures have been reassigned their meanings by water. No longer proclamations, they are markers, scenic anchors in an underwater topography that guides nets, divers, and attention. A statue's gaze meets a fisherman's careful step. An obelisk becomes a landmark for returning home. We move slowly along the harbor edge now, letting repetition lull us. Stone, pause. Breath, pause. Light, pause. Feel the water's pressure at the ankles, the way it supports rather than resists. Let the hands rest at the knees. Let the spine lengthen as if buoyed by a gentle current. There is no need to hurry past these witnesses. They have been waiting long enough to teach us how to wait. Scholars might say that monuments anchor civic identity, that they gather stories around themselves like silt gathers in a hollow. That is true, and also incomplete. Here, underwater, identity has become companionship. The monuments do not insist on remembrance. They accept it when it comes. They keep their vigil not for triumph, but for continuity. A continuity felt in the way light returns each day, in the way tides repeat their soft arithmetic. Notice how sound behaves around them. A distant engine resolves into a muted percussion. A diver's fin sends a low thrum along stone that answers with a gentle echo. These are not sharp noises but rounded ones, softened at the edges, as if the harbor has wrapped them in cloth. We can match our breathing to this acoustical kindness. Inhale with the curve, exhale with the bass, and feel thought itself slow to the same tempo. There is comfort in realizing that meaning can be reassigned without loss. A statue displaced into water is not diminished, it is translated. It learns a new language of currents and shade, of touch rather than proclamation. And we, in attending to it, learn a parallel lesson, that our own weight can be redistributed, our own urgencies eased. Breathe with the stone once more, let the breath lengthen, let it find the quiet cadence the monuments keep. As we come to the end of this gentle circuit, the harbor edge folds back into silt and shadow. The witnesses remain where they are, companionable and calm, their patience extending an invitation we do not have to accept all at once. We will carry their steadiness with us as we drift onward, the low hum of granite, the softened gaze of a sphinx, and allow it to settle, layer by layer, into our own quiet. A serene underwater reconstruction of ancient halls resting in peaceful silt. We come now to a kind of gentle disputation, not the sharp quarrel of headlines, but the slow, patient conversation of currents and cores. Consider three textures of evidence as if they were three instruments in a low chamber ensemble. A long pastoral groan that draws itself out over centuries, a muted percussion that punctuates in sudden, tidy strikes, and the domestic shuffle of human hands rearranging thresholds and harbors. Each offers a plausible melody for how rooms that once hosted lamplight and linen came to lay down in silt. First, the long pastoral groan, slow subsidence, and the patient rise of sea. One might suppose that the earth itself surrendered parts of the shore to deeper water, an unlacing of foundations that occurs over generations. Imagine the gentle sinking of an entire shoreline, sediment settling, groundwater shifting, the long compaction of the land like a page pressed by time. In cores, this appears as gradual banding, layer after layer of sand and mud stacking like erased lines of a map. There is a comfort in this reading, time itself as the agent, soft and inexorable, teaching rooms to lower their voices and let their thresholds accept the sea's hush. Breathe with that thought. Allow the inhale to stretch long, like a pastoral groan finding its note. Second, the muted percussion, the quick, decisive event, earthquake, perhaps accompanied by an inlet opening or a violent storm surge, that reshapes a coastline in one negotiated instant. Here the sea speaks in percussive notes, a struck gong, a sudden rearrangement. There are historical hints of such episodes in the Mediterranean's long register. One thinks, quietly, of late antique upheavals, of land and water reordering themselves in hours rather than years. The evidence reads as collapsed facades, toppled columns held in awkward embrace, a courtyard turned to a shallow pond. These are the percussion marks in the record, distinct, abrupt, and luminous in their clarity. Exhale with the imagined echo of one such strike. Let the sound fall out of the chest. Third, the domestic shuffle. Human choices and harbor management, the slow redirection of channels, the piling of docks, the shifting economy that changes which places are kept dry and which are let go. People rearrange their coasts like furniture. They choose to shore up here and neglect there, to dredge a passage and allow another quay to rest. This is not blame, but recognition of how practice alters place. Photographs, port accounts, municipal ledgers, and the quiet testimony of maps show the ways harbors evolve. Quays extended, warehouses abandoned, river mouths misliked and left to gather silt. The shuffle is intimate, a carpenter's choice, a magistrate's budget, a harbor master's decision. And in that intimacy, there is a human scale that balances the cosmic and the sudden. There are methodological comforts in such multiplicity. When a diver brushes away a patch of silt and reveals a fallen cornice, she does not erase the longer stories that accompany that cornice. Instead, she adds a new line to the manuscript and hands it back to the present. We read bits, stratigraphy here, a ceramic scatter there, a sudden deposit of rubble, and weave them into narratives that are honest about uncertainty. Our scholars' phrases are hushed. One might suppose, one could imagine, the evidence implies. And in that humility, we find a gentleness. We prefer questions that keep the system open rather than answers that close it. How does this plurality comfort us as listeners? Perhaps because it mirrors our own lives, small, repeated tilts, occasional bangs, and the choices we make that nudge direction over time. The palace's sinking becomes, in that likeness, familiar rather than alien. The story stops being an accusatory tale and becomes a domestic one. Long wear, a sudden misfortune, and human rearrangement, all knitting together into a single, complex lullaby. Let the phrase settle. It agrees with many tides. Let it rest on the breath. Let us practice a soft, bodily chorus to hold this idea. Inhale with the groan, long, patient, filling the ribs. Exhale with the percussion, letting the echo fall out of the chest. Inhale with the shuffle, small, deliberate, attentive. Exhale and let all three settle into a quiet. Repeat, softer, until the rhythm matches the water around us. Breathe with the thought that multiple causes can comfort rather than confuse. Breathe until the phrase becomes a soft instrument in your torso. We will carry this chorus as we continue. The groan, the percussion, the shuffle, a triad that refuses singular certainty and offers instead a companionable multiplicity. In the slow archive of silt and stone, that plurality is not a problem to be solved, but a companionship to be learned. A serene underwater reconstruction of ancient halls resting in peaceful silt. There is a small mercy in digressions. They let the mind unfurl and shapes the main narrative will not require. Here, in the hush of Section 8, we let ourselves be carried into the palace's softer margins, the ecology that writes in algae and shell rather than ink, the silt that is both dust and blanket. Imagine algae as slow calligraphy on marble, each frond a deliberate stroke that attends to curves of capital and cheek. Bivalves become tiny metronomes, opening in a rhythm that keeps time with tide. We are not leaving the palace. We are widening the lens to include the living processes that preserve and remake. One might suppose that decay is only loss, but there is also repair. Seagrass meadows stitch the coastline back together, shell beds cushion stone, peat preserves the shape of planks. The sea in its patient way becomes an archivist and a conservator, not in the human sense, but in the slow, procedural logic of biology. Tiny creatures enact restorations at a pace that teaches our attention humility. Feel, briefly, the body's reply. Notice the weight of your own hands against your lap, the quieting at the base of the throat when you imagine water pressing kindly where the air once pressed sharply. Let your feet find the imagined give of sand beneath them. Breathe with the seasonal cycles. Inhale slowly with the growth. Exhale with the settling. There is a richness in these small ecologies. Barnacles lace a cornice like a string of muffled beads. Sponges bloom in niches, filtering with an almost clerical patience. Worms turn sediment, and thereby rewrite the palimpsest inch by inch. These are not heroic acts. They are the embroidery of habit. The algae waits with an infinite patience, and in that waiting it performs a kind of rescue, draping fragile wood with soft tissues that slow decay and give conservators something to work with when the time comes. We will let a gentle digression take the form of a tiny narrative. A single plank, once part of a chamber's floor, became submerged and lay quiet. Over seasons it was colonized by shell and frond. Its grain softened, its varnish pirouette into microfilms of life. When divers eventually lift a corner of that plank, the conservator does not see only rot. She sees layers of intervention, algae, mineral incrustation, microfauna, each of which must be read like a line of script. The conservation work is careful and reversible. Desalination baths, patient mechanical cleaning, the slow coaxing of impregnating consolidants. Each step is an attentive reply to what the sea has scripted. There are sound textures here that deserve their own attention. The sibilant shawl of silt settles softly over a ledge. The rasp of a crab against a mosaic tile is a minute percussion. A shell clacking is like a tiny tongue clicking at a margin. These micro sounds are the lullabies of the deep, minimal, repeating with a measured anonymity. They invite the listener to narrow focus. Not the great clatter of history, but the small, persistent noises that fill the space between stone and memory. Match your breath to one of these tiny rhythms and listen as the body learns to slow. In speaking of ecology as archivists, we are not romanticizing neglect. Rather, we are recognizing a partnership. The sea can both repair and transform, and often both at once. Seagrass beds slow currents so that silt will lay down in an even cloth. Mollusks secrete shell that mends microerosion. Microbes precipitate minerals that can cement loose fragments. There is a slow symbiosis here between artifact and ecosystem that makes the archaeological record legible in its own peculiar way. One might suppose that such a partnership is indifferent, and yet there is a tenderness to the slow work of accretion and enclosure. Let us end this digression with a bodily reminder and a soft return. Feel the softening at the base of your skull as the imagination eases. Let the shoulders roll slightly and settle. Rest the tongue behind the teeth and allow the breath to flatten into a calm tide. Breathe with the algae, breathe with the shell, breathe with the silt. A serene underwater reconstruction of ancient hulls resting in peaceful silt. Rediscovery often begins with a small, accidental tug. A net snags where it should not. A fisherman lifts not fish but a sliver of carved stone, salty and patient, wrapped in the harbor's slow script. He takes a photograph with a careful thumb and sends it along as if it were a private note. One might suppose that such discoveries should be dramatic, announced with lights and instruments. And yet more often they arrive like a whispered offering. A thing comes loose, is noticed, is shown. Breathe with the tide. Let the chest answer the small surprise with a long, soft inhale. From that small act, communal attention gathers. A photographic grain travels farther than a single harbor. An image posted discreetly becomes a polite summons for scholars, conservators, and local custodians. The camera shutter, muted underwater into a ripple, translates into public curiosity. Sonar blips follow like cautious questions on a page. We imagine the chain, the fisher's cautious photograph, the tentative reply of a local steward, the arrival of a survey team with soft-booted divers, and a van full of low-breathing instruments, and then the careful mapping that turns suggestion into a plan. Breathe with the unfolding. There is tactile astonishment in first hands on marble. A diver's gloved finger brushes a patch of silt and reveals a threshold's worn edge. The grit that resists is not merely dirt, but time forming a crust. The hand discovers coolness and micro-scratches like the handwriting of lives. When the conservator finally receives a fragment on a tray, the movement slows. Salt is coaxed out in patient baths. The object rests on felt and foam, and the conservator's brush sounds like rain in a quiet room. These are not heroic gestures, but acts of sustained tenderness. Each motion is measured so that nothing is hurried, nothing canceled. Modern tools in this story become listening devices rather than intrusions. Sonar returns are reimagined as gentle pulses of attention. Photogrammetry renders a ruined hall in many overlapping photographs, which a computer stitches into a delicate three-dimensional map. Generators hum at low levels like distant organs. Camera shutters are muted into soft clicks. Measuring tapes unspool with a soft authority. It is a curious fact that the most advanced instruments often aim to make things legible in the subtlest way possible, to translate texture rather than erase it. Public walks and community forums temper the technical with the human. The fisherman who found the shard brings his neighbor. Elders recall a remembered quay. Schoolchildren come with sticky hands and bright questions. In one small scene, a teacher lays a replica on a table and invites pupils to touch under supervision. The replica gives tactile reassurance while the original sleeps in a conservator's bath. This is stewardship by proximate care. We show, we shield, we steward. And that chorus becomes a soft institutional breath that carries the object from tray to table to memory. Ethical choices thread every step. There are debates, displayed original or facsimile, onshore museum or in situ preservation. And these are moral decisions as much as technical ones. How much should a fragile threshold be lifted and exposed? Who decides who sees first? Agreements are drafted with local authorities and fishing communities at the table. Conservators explain reversible methods. Replicators offer touch without risk. The process is slow because it must be consensual, and in the slowness there is dignity. One might suppose that bureaucracy dulls wonder. Instead, handled tenderly, it becomes a structure for shared care. Attend to small procedural sounds that signal attention. A crane's chain moving at a pace that makes no clatter, a winch that notches with a rounded click, conservator brushes whispering across a tile. These are not harsh noises, but the pulse of public care. Match your breath to them. Inhale on the lift, exhale as the object settles, and feel your own body slow to the cadence of tending. Let your shoulders soften, let the tongue rest behind the teeth, let the knees find a small ease. Maps and lab reports enter the narrative as collaborative texts. Survey grids are drawn in conversation with fishermen who know shoals by name. Sonar maps are cross-checked with elders' recollections. The lab's notes become public-facing narratives rather than closed archives. There is a democratizing hush to this handling. Information travels from the tray to the table to the classroom in a chain of trust. This is how a modern community learns to hold its past without consuming it, by translating data into stories that local hands can steward. Finally, rediscovery is not an ending but a renewed duty. A careful lift begins a long project of care. The artifact will sleep in conservation as techniques are perfected. The public will have replicas to touch and stories to carry. The harbor will be monitored with gentle instruments so that future losses are avoided. There are small ceremonial moments too. An elder laying down bread beside a lifted stone as thanks. A diver whispering the fine date into a log like a benediction. Volunteers forming a slow human chain to pass conservation trays without haste. These quiet rites make rediscovery intimate and communal. Feel the softening at your collarbone as you imagine those hands, the slackening in your knees as the community lowers its voice together. Breathe with the collective attention. We show, we shield, we steward, and the phrase becomes a lullaby the harbor repeats to itself. Cleopatra's Sunken Palace, a serene underwater reconstruction of ancient halls resting in peaceful silt. We follow now a single, tactile arc, the dive, the lab, the tiny object that stitches 2 millennia with a fingertip. The story tightens into a single hand's motion, a gloved reach in a darkened inner room, the slow pull of silt from around a small shape, the careful cradle that carries it into light. Breathe with the reach. Feel the ribs widen with the diver's soft exertion and then flatten as she brings the find into the bubble of attention. The diver moves as if through a familiar house, not a museum. Fins fold, hands translate. A torch paints the niche in watercolor rather than flame. There is a muffled rhythm to the regulator. Each click is a measured step. When the hand brushes away the first layer of silt, the texture resists like a long-held secret releasing. When the object becomes partly visible, it confers a small, sudden intimacy. A curve of metal, a worn groove, a smear of ochre. We hold our breath with the finding and then let it. Once ashore, the artifact travels in a slow liturgy. It comes wrapped in foam, stilled in trays, and carried with the soft choreography of people who have learned to move with reverence. The conservator lifts it into a lab that smells faintly of distilled water and old paper. Under magnification, the object's surface becomes a landscape of tiny ridges and ancient handling. The first treatment is gentle, desalination baths that coax the salt out drop by patient drop. Mechanical cleaning with soft brushes and bamboo picks that speak in the whisper of feathers, consolidants applied in minute measures to give the metal a temporary embrace that is always designed to be removed again if need be. Breathe with the lab's slow attention. Here is the moment that anchors us. A small signet ring, its bezel flattened by time, carrying a thumb mark that might once have sealed a letter or clasped a child's cloak. The ring is cool in the gloved hand. It has a slight give where metal has thinned. Its inner curve holds a whisper of an ancient palm's anatomy. When the conservator lifts it from the tray and shows it to a descendant who has been invited to witness the moment, there is a private astonishment that needs no explanatory caption. A woman leans forward, fingers clasped at her waist, and for a breath the present and the past trade places. We hold the gaze of that exchange. We let it settle. We hold the small ring. We let it sleep. Conservation here is spoken of in human terms. Desalination is not merely a chemical act. It is a long, damp exhalation that returns the object to a state where its own story can be read. Mechanical cleaning is a conversation between brush and surface, between patience and trace. Reversible stabilisation, the practice of consolidating flaking surfaces with adhesives designed to be undone, is an ethical promise. We intend not to fix forever, but to support enough that the next generation can read anew. We hold the pledge to reversibility. We let it sleep. There are private reactions that are not recorded in reports. A diver may press her forehead against a bulkhead once the job is done and speak the find's date into a log as if offering a benediction. A conservator may, in the quiet after a successful bath, set aside the tray and close her eyes for a breath. In one tender scene, a child, descendant of the harbor, is invited to trace a replica's curve and exclaims softly when a familiar family motif emerges, a small knot pattern, perhaps, and the room pauses with her. Paper is folded, hands are warmed, stories are offered in small measures. We pass the replica with careful palms. We let the original sleep. We practice, in this passage, a custodial chorus to match procedure. We hold it. We let it sleep. We hold it. We let it sleep. Each repetition is a sealing gesture, a ritual that both comforts and secures. After each reveal, the lab gives time. Trays rest. Data are logged. The object is wrapped to sleep again. This cyclical pattern mirrors the tides and helps the community to pace its wonder. Sound here becomes intimate. The tiny clack of a lab ruler, the soft susurration of a brush on ceramic, the faint tick of a data logger, none of them sharp, all of them slow. Match your breath to these small noises. Inhale with the brush's sweep, exhale as the ruler clicks. Allow the data logger's slow tick to steady your chest. Let the hands find the calm that the room models. Breathe with the rhythm of cataloging. Breathe with the hush of the tray. Finally, there is the ethical choice about what travels beyond the tray. Originals may be kept in conservation vaults. Replicas may be made for touch and for classrooms. Digital meshes may allow the public to walk through a virtual corridor without risking the carved cornice. Each choice is framed by the mantra we share: to allow access without harm, to allow memory without consuming the object. The ring may sleep in its tray, but its story wakes in classroom hands and local stories. And in that waking, the harbor learns a new way to hold itself. We hold the story close. We let the object sleep. As we close this tactile arc, let us feel the tiny object as a pivot between centuries, small, dense, and resonant. Breathe with the conservator's long patience. Breathe with the diver's cautious excitement. And let the whispered custody of "we hold it, we let it sleep" become a soft heartbeat that guides us onward. Legacy is not a single stone set atop another. It is 1,000 small acts that add up to habit. Here, in the quiet aftermath of discovery and conservation, the palace's continuing life is threaded through domestic rituals and community care. Replicas laid out on tables for schoolchildren, volunteers sweeping planks on a raised walkway, a teacher describing the ring's thumb mark as if reading a line of family script. These civic domestic sounds become a lullaby, the murmur of meetings, the soft scratch. We will imagine a local school visit. Children gather under a tent by the shore, and a conservator, patient as any storyteller, places a replica of a ring upon a padded tray. The teacher invites small hands, one by one, to trace the loop. The children gasp at the coolness, then fall quiet, not from all alone, but from the simple surprise of touch that is allowed. A volunteer who once fished these waters stands at the rear and smiles. An elder nods, as if remembering a lost quay. These micro-scenes are stitched into civic memory. One might suppose that municipal meetings are the dull part of stewardship, but in fact they are where the ethical pattern is woven. A harbor committee meets and debates low-lying proposals, a walkway placement that will protect a submerged threshold, a touch policy for replicas, a teacher training session for mindful handling. The paperwork becomes a ritual of care when spoken aloud and when the same names return each month. Repetition establishes habit, and habit becomes protocol. There are personal testimonies that both ground and guide policy. The diver who found a carved lintel recalls the sensation of hands meeting stone beneath a cloud of silt and speaks of feeling, oddly, at home. A retired fisher describes how the harbor once sang with ropes and how seeing a lifted fragment returned a remembered cadence. A teacher recounts the hush that descends on a class when a child first touches a facsimile. That small pause is, she says, the sound of understanding. These voices enter planning meetings not as spectacle, but as guidance. Practical solutions emerge from such modest deliberations. Replicas are made for tactile programs. Interpretive trails are routed to avoid sensitive patches. Monitoring buoys are placed to measure subtle shifts in sediment. Low-impact engineering, reversible boardwalks, padded supports under interpretive plaques, reduces harm while inviting touch. Community-managed monitoring invites fishermen to record observations in a shared log. Their daily notes feed into professional surveys, turning informal acquaintance into systematic care. We must attend to the modest economies of stewardship. Funding is often a patchwork. A grant pays for a buoy, a fundraiser covers replica casting, a school project supplies volunteers. Every small donation becomes a strand in a communal safety net. The volunteer who mends a handrail is as much a curator as the conservator in white gloves. The teacher who arranges a visit is as much a steward as the director of a museum. Access and conservation need not be opposites. Consider a two-tiered plan. Original artifacts rest in climate-controlled vaults, while carefully made replicas circulate in classrooms and along raised walkways. Digital meshes allow virtual corridors for those who cannot travel. Community labs teach safe casting techniques so that children learn stewardship by making and caring for their own facsimiles. This blended approach keeps the object's physical integrity while fostering tactile intimacy. It is translation rather than sacrifice. There are private rituals of stewardship that resemble prayers. Before a long conservation lift, a diver may place a token, a sprig of local grass, perhaps. By a recovered threshold, an elder may sing a short song of thanks when a bench is placed along the interpretive path. These acts are not performative. They are the small benedictions that turn maintenance into meaning. As we prepare to step back from administrative details, let us practice a short anaphora to root capacity in the body. We sweep, we mend, we remember, we teach. Each phrase is a measured instruction and a pledge. Speak it softly in the chest with us, inhaling as the phrase begins, exhaling as it closes, and let the words settle like sand across the palm of an open hand. Legacy is therefore not only what is preserved, but how preservation is made part of daily life. Programs that invite touch through replicas, that employ local people in monitoring roles, that train teachers in respectful handling. These small, repeatable acts amass into cultural habit. The palace's afterlife becomes a civic practice, a domestic ritual that folds heritage into living routines. There is a steady dignity in this, small things done again and again, a chorus that outlasts one generation. We end this section with a bodily return. Feel the relaxation deepen from the feet up, ankles warm and free, knees release, hips soften. Let the breath fall into a patient rhythm and hold the image of the harbor-sloped walkway where children touch replicas and elders smile. Breathe with the civic rhythms. Let the anaphora echo once more. We sweep, we mend, we remember, we teach. We come now to the tidal bed with the purposeful softness of someone closing a book for the night. Our hands are light on the cover, and our breath follows the margin. The sea has learned the art of lullaby, long, patient hums at low pitch, a net of small sounds that steady the attention rather than excite it, and we will borrow that art for our own descent. The red granite glint that once marked an entrance becomes, at this hour, a low ember held in the palm of memory. The Sphinx's softened gaze is less a question than a companion's tilt. The inner ring's tiny reflection is a point for the fingertip of imagination. Breathe with the tide. Feel the ribs answer the slow arc of water. Let the limbs soften. There is a scholastic aside offered in the quieter register. One might suppose an ending needs a verdict, a cause named, a sequence tightly mapped, and yet the sea prefers a different grammar. It teaches patience. It prefers multiplicity to certainty. It prefers that stories be taught as domestic practices rather than courtroom dramas. This is why we finish with small things, touchable objects, habitual care, repeated practicalities that become rites. Let that thought be a soft lamp at the edge of the chamber. We will practice a gentle routing of attention now, moving from extremity to center following a sequence for embodied rest. Feet, hips, spine, shoulders, breath, eyelids. Begin with the feet. Picture them planted in a shallow bed of warm sand. Feel the mild give beneath the arches, the soft compaction that invites release. As you breathe in, imagine a cool ribbon of air around the ankles. As you breathe out, permit the knees to fold and the lower legs to rest. There is a tender engineering here. Gravity meets the water, and both agree to hold us in an easy cradle. Move gently up the spine. Imagine each vertebra easing into buoyant placement. A current lifts and aligns without hurry. Breathe in along the back like a narrow ribbon. Breathe out and let the shoulders drop from their small, private tension. Picture the sternum flattening into the sea's soft regimen. With each cycle, the torso becomes less of an active project and more of a room learned to be inhabited. Allow the muscles along the vertebrae to slacken as if putting down a tray of cups. Careful, deliberate, relieved. Attend now to the hands. Set them where they feel most settled, on the belly, on a pillow, or folded across the lap, and feel the fingertips warm. Imagine, In the palm, the small cool ring we have met before, small enough to be a point of focus, large enough to hold a memory. Let the ring be a talisman for the breath, a return point when thought wanders. Touch it in imagination and notice how the mind eases, how the chest follows. Let that tactile point be an anchor that draws attention back from the edge of story. Close the eyelids when you are ready. Let them fall like curtains closing a private chamber. Blink once and notice how the world behind the lids keeps color as warmth rather than as a bright demand. The red granite becomes hue and suggestion. The Sphinx is reduced to a horizontal fidelity. The inner chamber becomes a room with a friend in it rather than an impenetrable vault. When the lids are down, the narrative thins into texture. No sharp angles, only folded cloth of night and water. Allow the descriptive detail to thin into texture more broadly now. Sand warm, salt familiar, root steady. The inner chamber's small object, whether ring or carved bead, functions as an emotional hinge. It does not resolve history. It proves continuity by a simple tactile fact. Hands once touched this, hands will touch again. That small continuity is a steady thing to place in the chest, a pebble to set into the shoal of breath. There is, finally, a sense of temporal charity in this stillness. Seasons will pass over the harbor, and more stories will come to rest beside these stones. Children will learn old knot patterns and call them by new names. Volunteers will take up worn routines and sing a new low note when passing a tray. We do not fix a single story in place. We weave a practice that allows many stories to sleep alongside one another. In that allowance, habit softens obligation, and repetition becomes a protecting shawl, an ordinary kind of liturgy. Hear the soundscape narrow to three supportive textures now. A sustained low drone of tide held beneath the ribs, the faint click or clasp of a bead in a tray at the edge of awareness, and the near breath of our companion voice. These three form a cradle. Match your inhale to the drone, the small internal click to the exhale, and let the voice be a narrow current that carries you deeper. If thought wanders, bring it back to that click. If worry rises, let the drone hold it like the palm of a hand. A brief scholar's whisper before the last descent. Preservation is not heroism but courtesy. Conservators remove salts and slow baths, choose reversible glues rather than locks, and make decisions that keep the future open. Communities do not inherit monuments as trophies. They keep them warm with repetition, lessons in classrooms, low boardwalks over sensitive beds, volunteers passing trays at dusk. These acts are small, domestic liturgies. One might suppose grandeur is necessary for memory, but often gentle practice is enough. We will now move into the final loop, an anaphora of short phrases to be repeated softly until thought thins. Each phrase is an image and a benediction. Each repetition comes softer than the last. Repeat them in the chest with us, letting the intervals lengthen. Let the phrases continue, softer still, until the voice becomes almost a hush and the body is carried beyond the need for words. You have, at last, permission to let go. Allow your breath to become the tide's slow reply. Allow your heartbeat to keep steady like granite under a quiet sea. Allow your eyelids to fold and remain. We leave the palace under its silt, remembered, protected, at rest.